Welcome to Motor Development and Skill Learning Chapter 3. The slideshow going and we'll get going. All right, principles of motion and stability. Developmental changes are predictable. Changes are based on optimizing biomechanical principles of motion and stability over time. Changes can be seen across a variety of motor skills, and changes often produce more force, velocity, and accuracy. Again, if you think about this again, this is really a lifespan motor development course. And again, most of the examples I give are more probably on the far end of things because looking at athletics. But again, I think sometimes, when you look at extremes, it paints a better picture. And so again, y'all have had that person in your those of you that grew up playing dodgeball in gym class, right? There's always a few kids in there whose parents failed them miserably in teaching them how to throw a ball, right? And you'd see that they're often off balance in the movements they make. They're off balance when they throw. Because they're off balance when they throw, the ball sails left, right, up, down, not particularly at their target. Doesn't come in with much speed, doesn't come in with much accuracy, and there's not much force produced when they do it, right? And then you got the other kids whose parents taught them how to throw properly, and they have good biomechanical principles. Again, they learn how to have a good stable base when throwing. They have optimal biomechanical throwing motions, and the balls they throw are thrown with more force, which means there's more velocity and more chance that they just hit that other kid who's terrible at throwing in the face, right? They have higher accuracy. So again, we see this through a lot of motor skills, right? And so and it changes over time as well. So in either case, the kids on one far extreme that are completely uncoordinated, and the kids that are very coordinated in throwing motions, if you looked at them a year ago, both of them would have been more uncoordinated, and then a year before that more uncoordinated, a year before that. And if you fast forward, hopefully, especially even with the uncoordinated kids, the more that they play and stuff like that, you're going to see their skills adapt over time, as well as the other kids who have better biomechanical principles as they do things. Motion and stability. Developmental changes in movement occur according to biomechanical principles. Motion and stability are two principles with a larger field of biomechanics, and motion and stability are known as the physics of movement, right? So when you're standing still, stability is usually at your all-time high, so to speak, unless you have some neurological disorder where when you stand, you may have trouble stabilizing. But in general, most folks, in stance position will have more stability than in a locomotor position or a movement position. But you need good stability when you do motions if you want to be successful in those motions, right? And that's one of the things that you learn over time. So any of you that have small children or have been around small children or remember any time being around small children, especially when you're going through the stages of their first learning to walk, right? So the first thing a kid does when they're learning to walk is they learn to pull themselves up using, like a chair or the parent's leg or whatever else, and they learn to stand. Right? So for a while, they can't stand on their own without holding on to something. All of a sudden, they let go and they learn how to wobble, and they'll balance and they'll stand. Next thing they do is they want to now use movement principles in the standing position, right? So they want to learn how to walk. So you'll see them, they take really wide base walking stance, and they're trying to maximize their stability, and, they're all over the place. And it's always, everybody posts their videos of their cute little baby learning to walk, and they're, they all got these wide little sumo stances, and they're, kind of waddling because they don't want to take too big of a step, and they're, just trying to get forward and everything, right? But again, over time, you see these same kids, people are posting on Instagram, oh, here's my kid, and the kid comes running now. All of a sudden, legs are closer together, stability, they've gained more stability, and their motions are more biomechanically sound. Just the sheer fact that they've practiced walking all the time. And it's not really that somebody gets onto them. It's one of those things that you just learn over time to trust your body. Your body learns new neurological, like synopsis patterns and things like that. Your muscles learn how to stabilize, in really act and react with the nervous system and the brain, and all those things come together, right? So again, what changes from A to B? Watching these videos, again, we've had trouble with loading the videos for these actual lecture things. We'll try to do it when we do it live. Since we'll have a bit more time live, and I don't want it, I don't want it to be messy on these. We'll go through the videos again, but basically what you'll see between A and B is, one, you can see the different ages, but you'll see the difference in the coordinated patterns and the better biomechanical principles and in their motions and the stability in image B versus image A. Okay, and again, that comes with age up to a point. Right? Newton's first law: an object at rest stays at rest, and an object in motion stays in motion until acted upon by a force. So again, unless, like if you have something moving and say it's on a frictionless surface and it's just going to keep rolling at the same speed, there's no forces acting upon it. You set it in motion, it starts rolling. It's going to roll in that direction at that speed, in a perfect zero gravity environment with nothing, like holding against it, until it bumps into something. At that point, it's going to change direction. It's going to change, the force that was produced in it, and everything else. Or, like if you roll a ball to somebody like a soccer ball, and that person now kicks it, right, changes the, they may add more force to it as well. So as it's rolling and losing speed, somebody now boots it, and it now picks up speed, and it goes in a different direction, right? Or the same thing, when you're standing there, until you add a new force to what you're doing, you're not moving anywhere, right? So inertia is a resistance to motion related to the mass, right? And so you have to have enough force to overcome that inertia, right? So based on your mass and what's holding it in place or holding it in motion, you must have a force that overcomes that to change that, right? Momentum is a product of mass and velocity. So again, you've got a heavy stone, a nice round stone, and you want to roll it, right? So, it's sitting still because of, gravity, the mass of the stone, and the inertia. It's not going to move until you start to push it. Now, again, once you start it rolling, you can start, you push with a certain amount of force. Once you get it rolling, the amount of force that you have to overcome inertia it has to be greater than once you get it rolling, right? So if somebody was already rolling a rock and they ask you to take over, and it's already moving, you come in and start pushing on it, you may put in, like, say 70% of the force that you would if you had to start that from a stop position, right? So you have to, once momentum gets going, the amount of force is not necessarily near as much that's needed to move once in motion, right? When a force is exerted on an object, the object will accelerate in the direction of the force, right? And again, that's important because, if you want something to go right, you have to direct the force right or left or straight or backwards, correct? So here's a simplified look at it. We must exert force to move objects and move ourselves. More inertia means that it's harder to move and more force application is required, right? So again, it's what I said, but this is kind of the short, easy way to look at it, right? This is the, if you want to go back and forth, you look at this, get this down, because anytime you read a physics textbook, this is how it's going to look. And understand this, right? So when you see this, understand this, okay? So again, when a child's learning to swing a bat, what the child must learn about inertia, okay? So again, if you've ever held a bat, especially one that's got some weight to it, you realize that first jerking motion of pulling the bat forward, and again, I'm not going to get into all the mechanics of using the legs and the hips and everything, but all the force generated with that twisting motion and extending the arms and everything else, you're exerting more force at that first part of getting that bat to move forward, right? As it starts to move forward, not as much force has to be generated if you want to keep that bat moving at that same speed. Now, again, you may want the bat to pick up speed as it goes, so you may continue that force throughout to increase your bat speed. So if you want to move an object farther and faster, increase force delivered to the object and increase distance over which the force is applied, right? So again, if you get behind a big, nice round rock that's going to roll for a little bit, right? If I give it a good hard push, let's say this is a large rock, and say I give it a good hard push and it rolls like a foot, right? Now, if I give it that same hard push, but I stay with it and keep pushing it, I can roll that thing as long as I can until I run out of energy, right? And so if I want it to go farther and faster, I want to keep the application of that force on that rock as high as possible, the amount of force, and as long as possible to have it move at that speed, because as soon as I release that force, it's going to start slowing down. So again, like when you throw a football or a baseball or a softball or anything else that you throw, as soon as it releases from your hand, it's going to start to decelerate, right? So even, pitchers that throw 100 and something miles an hour, it's going to decelerate. So again, if you were going to clock that a baseball thrown by a baseball player, if you had radars at different positions, you would actually over time, so say somebody's throwing from center field and you clock it coming out of their hand, you clock it as it passes over second base, you clock it as it passes over the pitcher's mound, and you clock it right before the catcher catches it at home, you would see the speed of that thing, you would see it slow down, right? So if it comes out of the hand at 105 miles an hour over second base, maybe it's at like 100 or 90 something, on down to, when it, before it gets to the catcher's mitt, maybe it's in the 90s or 80s or something, just depending, how, the mass of the ball and all that. And and again, we could calculate that, we could go with the mass of the ball and the acceleration and everything, and actually calculate what it would probably be at each one of those points. And then if we actually went out and tested it, we'd probably be pretty darn close. So again, adding distance to improve a kick. So that's one of the other things you can do. So it's one thing, like if you do a standing kick, the ball's right there by your foot, right? You swing that leg as hard as you can, ball goes so far. Now, as you can see in this video, this kid's going to take a running start before he kicks it. The ball's going to go farther, right? And again, we can do this with a lot of things. We do this when we jump, to jump for either vertical or horizontal distance, right? This is why, when they do the vertical jump for athletes, they do it from a standing jump. Every one of those athletes would love to take like a 2 to 3 step run up, to jump because they'll get a few more inches on their jump, right? Same thing with this, same thing with throwing, whether it's kicking or throwing, right? If you can take a step or take kind of a running step into it and throw it, that's why you see, again, you don't see outfielders just stand, pick up a ball and go from like a flat-footed stance and then try to fire a ball in, right? You see outfielders, they run up on the ball and they do what they call a crow hop, right? And that's where they do that. They scoop the ball up, they do that big jumping kick while they're still running forward, and then boom, they fling their body forward as they throw it to get the ball to move faster and travel a greater distance, right? Because they have much further distance to throw, especially when thrown to like home, or if it's a right fielder throwing to third or whatever that is, that helps them to create more force, which will create more velocity and allow the ball to travel further and faster. Okay. So again, we can do the same thing. We can add distance prior to, like releasing a ball or prior to kicking a ball. Same thing with hitting. It's like the whole, any of you that ever saw the movie Happy Gilmore, and again, the principle's sound in what they do in that movie, where he has that running, he runs up and hits the ball and the ball goes flying, right? Now again, that's a hard thing to do. It's a hard movement to coordinate. Any of you that have ever been golfing, if you've ever tried that swing, you'll find it's very difficult to run up on the ball, swing as hard as you can with any accuracy, and hit the ball straight down the fairway, right? Now again, if you've done it and you've gotten lucky, you'll see like, okay, the ball goes flying, much further than when you're at your standing stance. But again, the difficulty of coordinating all that, getting the accuracy and hitting the ball at the right moment and all that is a lot more difficult with it. But again, you see that principle in a lot of different sports, right? Newton's second law is that an object's force is related to the mass and acceleration. So force equals mass times acceleration. Object's acceleration is related to the force applied in an inverse relationship. So your acceleration is your force divided by your mass. Okay. Again, these are very important principles when you're thinking about, how do you move something quickly, or how do you move in a large object as fast as possible, and things like that. Okay. And how much force needs to be applied. So people can throw only as hard as they can throw. Given this peak force level, how could you increase acceleration when throwing a ball? Again, there's a lot of things, a lot of answers you guys can probably give me on this. So everything from changing the technique, right? So, if we're saying, okay, you can only throw as hard as you can from a standing position, well, what about a running up position? What about, like you look at pitchers, so, a pitcher's learning to throw, they get, let's say they start topping out in the 80s. But again, they don't have good lower body dynamics in pushing off the mound and throwing their body forward when they do that. So you can teach them that, right? So you can teach them some different mechanics, adds, some miles per hour to the ball. You can add in different, like improve their muscle sequencing, as they go from legs to twisting to using their torso as it works up through the arm, and using their arm and release point and all those things increases it. Some of the other things, getting outside of this a bit, and really, like I said, always be multifactorial in our thought processes, even though this is going to be a bit outside of, what we're discussing here. But adding strength, you have somebody that's got stronger muscles, more, type 2 muscles, practicing, practicing having quick reaction from the brain, telling the body to use those muscles and throw, and improving that again through practice. So we can practice those things. We can do things such as power movements to improve the speed and efficiency at which we can do things under stress or duress. All those things can help, right? And so Those are all different ways we could increase acceleration. And then Newton's third law, to every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So when you push on something, it pushes back, right? You know, some of you guys probably have seen the memes where, you know, they got big muscled up dudes and, you know, they're doing push-ups and someone's like, hey, you doing push-ups? And they're like, no, I'm pushing the earth down, right? You know, again, you know, if you push against something that has a greater mass than you, your body is the one that's going to move, right? So, you know, for example, if I push against the ground in a push-up position, the ground is going to move. Now you flip me on my back and give me either dumbbells or a barbell with weight that I can extend my arms with. So it's something I can forcefully push, because the mass of my body, the weight bench, and the earth upon which it sits is greater than the mass of the bar and weights. The weights themselves will move, right? And so as I push on those, they're actually, you know, the mass of the weights with gravity is actually pushing back on me. Okay. So oppositional movements and directional forces. Again, you know, when you, this is another concept to think about, you know, when you're lifting weights, is that, you know, the direction at which you push is going to be important, especially when dealing with gravity, on how much resistance is going to happen, right? So that's why there's certain points, like say you do like a bicep curl, right? When you're doing the up down motion, there's actually more force acting against you as you're pulling the dumbbell up. Now as you get towards the top and you're pulling the dumbbell towards your shoulder, because you're moving more horizontally, less vertically, it seems a bit easier. Now there's some other principles, you know, you could say, oh, okay, that's why it's easier at the top or even at the bottom. Sometimes that first reactional position, because you're moving from the arm being straight and you're moving forward before it actually starts moving up, you know, again, there's a little bit there. But now at the top, it's always even more easier than right at the very beginning at the bottom. So you're like, okay, well, both of those are horizontal. Why is it easier at the top of the motion versus the very beginning at the bottom? Well, there's other principles outside of this principle that are acting right there. Now we're looking at the biomechanics and kinesiology of the body, right? So at that position, the muscle is very close to itself, you know, and we've now, like when you look at the lever system, where the insertion of the biceps tendon is on the forearm, on the ulna, it's actually closer. So because of that, you're gonna have more mechanical advantage, you know, when you're thinking about it from a lever system, because the moment arm is now closer to the actual axis, right? So again, whole different science getting, well, not really. I mean, we're really dealing in physics and biomechanics and kines, but we're looking at one aspect of the biomechanics kines, and now here's another aspect that comes into play as well with the whole lever, right? Um, So again, force generation aided by oppositional movement. So again, first kid's running, right? So he's creating kind of a diagonal force, because as his feet hit the ground, he's going to apply both a vertical and horizontal force as he pushes back. So it's really more of a diagonal, if you look at it. Again, if you look at proper, you know, like proper running techniques and stuff like that, you'll see where that plays into it. So you got the boy on the left that's doing that. You got the girl on the right that's doing pure vertical force movement push, because she's going to push against the ground and travel vertically up, right? And again, the gravity that's going to act upon both of them is, the gravity is the same, but as you look at it, one of them is going directly against gravity, where the other one is only have portions of his movements directly against gravity, right? So again, um, the boy running is not going directly against gravity. Only certain principles of his motions are, where the girl on the right is directly defying gravity, so to speak, in her quest to move upward. All right. Exert force in primary movement planes. Use force in the plane of motion in which you want to move yourself or an object. Avoid rotational movements that reduce force in desired plane. This is one of the things I always get onto when I teach running technique. I don't know what it is. Actually, I do know what it is in recent years. So let me take you back to the old days when I was in phys ed, and probably even prior to that, kids were even more advanced. I don't know, or there might have been. There's probably a curve at which phys ed wasn't really developed all that well, and then it got developed really well, and now it's the laughable clown show that it is now. I'm just going to say it for what it is. Anyways, back when I was in physical education, we actually had phys ed teachers. And I remember one of my phys ed teachers very well. She was an older lady that, man, she harped on everything you did. She wanted proper mechanics. She taught us how to shoot basketballs, how to throw, how to jump, I mean, everything. And it was all about technique, technique, technique. And she'd hammer it in you. We weren't even allowed to actually like engage in the fun activities until everybody showed at least a decent amount of proficiency, so nobody was going to get whacked in the face doing something stupid, things like that. So anyways, a lot of the movements, again, it's not that, all kids my age were really good runners necessarily, or all of them had really good running technique, but most kids did because we were harped on how to run. Right. One of the things was that we harped on is if you're running forward, why are your arms or legs going to make any sideways movements? Or why do you want to twist your body a lot or do side to side movements? Right. Again, it makes sense because, again, if I'm running forward, so if I'm a 100-meter sprinter, I want to direct all my forces of pulling my arm or leg forward, and then as my feet touch the ground, I want to kick everything straight back as hard as I can and as fast as I can to propel my body directly forward. If I have any other excess movements, it's going to distract from that force going directly backwards to propel my body directly forwards. Right. And so when you have wasted, again, coaches will call them wasted movements. It's not only that it's a waste, that you're just utilizing energy that you don't need to utilize in a direction and plane that you don't need to go. It can actually decrease the amount of force that you're placing as well, or you have to place additional forces to counteract that motion, right, to keep you on track. So again, this is why it's important to not have extra motions and movements in different planes that are not helping you in your pursuit of what you're trying to accomplish in your motions. Increasing velocity, rotating limbs and projected objects, increase rotational velocity. So again, swinging a baseball bat, you see this in throwing. There's a certain amount of rotational, if you can rotate at the right time, have it in the right sequential step with all the other motions going on from your lower body to the throwing or the swinging of the bat, it's going to increase your ability to hit a ball further, throw a ball faster, so on and so forth. So it'll increase relative length. So you increase rotational velocity, relative length, fully extend at release or contact. Again, that's when you see a good batting swing, everything stays compact, and then you see the elbows and everything extend, and right at full extension is right where you want to hit the ball, right? So again, same thing with these. We saw this kid the other day when we tried to run this video. So you see the kid on the left, he kind of kicks the ball as he's running at the same time, so it doesn't really extend the leg or anything. The ball doesn't get a lot of inertia. Kid on the right who's older, you can see stepping into it, and his leg is going to swing and kick, and he'll hit the ball close to extension as he kicks the ball. It's going to go much faster. And it's going to go a much further distance as long as something doesn't impede its progress, right? And again, if you keep your limb extended throughout, um, you're not going to be able to generate the amount of force as well, right? So there's a way of, again, if you extend a baseball bat out at the very beginning of a swing and try to sweep it through like a broom, is how my coach used to say. Like, he'd tell folks that would do that. He's like, looks like you're swinging a broom. Funny thing is I used to teach baseball lessons when I was living in Austin. It's been years now, like 14 years or so. Um, and I would see that in kids, and I'd use the same analogy. I'm like, it's like you're swinging a broom, right? I'm like, you're extending it, you're keeping it out, and you gotta have to explain to them what you're trying to do is hold it tight to your body and then extend, right? Extend out right at the last minute, So I'd say keep it close, and then keep it close and pop it out at the last second. Keep it close, pop it out, keep it close, pop it out, and again, had to use different, and here's the beauty of it. Some kids would get that, some kids wouldn't. So what did I do? Same thing we were talking about the other day, right? Use a practitioner, have to figure out how to reach each athlete or each client that you have. So I would go through different verbal cues. I would go through different teaching methods. Sometimes I had to be more hands-on, and actually like move kids through motions and be like, oh, like hold their shoulders. I want your shoulders here as you do this. Keep your elbow. Other kids, I could sit there and I'd swing the bat and they'd watch me in slow motion and they could mimic it. They're more visual, more. Some kids had to be more tactile, where like you put your hand in a spot to like tell them like keep this close, and then as I'm swinging their bat through, I'd actually pull on the end of the bat and say, okay, now extend it out, and do those things. And again, that's what being a good practitioner is all about, is that you've got to be able to um, use different techniques. And sometimes you're going to use techniques you're not really necessarily stuff that you use a lot or you're always comfortable with, but it works for them, right? And so keep that in mind as you do things. Force and time to make an object move, increase force applied for a given time. So example, karate chops to bricks. To make an object stop, increase time over which a given force is applied. So soft landing in gymnastics, right? So again, you could do a hard landing in gymnastics, and you're going to stop, but there can be other things that happen to that. And again, there's so much velocity going into that, you can have system breakdowns, right? It's the same thing, you know, um, when stopping a car, if you want to get a car to, like to stop at a certain spot perfectly, the best thing to do is start applying the brake earlier, right? And let it decelerate at a right amount of time so you can stop here. If you slam on the brakes, you may not stop in time to where you want it, right? A lot of skills involve learning to absorb force, right? You learn to do this in running. You learn to do this in jumping and landing. You learn to do this when you catch a baseball or basketball, right? Or football. Any of you that have seen, um, you know, uh, especially there's a movie. Oh man, I think it's called Unnecessary Roughness or Necessary Roughness. I can't remember. It was either Necessary or Unnecessary Roughness. I remember they had a guy on there that was supposed to be a receiver because he's super fast, but he couldn't catch a ball, and they called him Stone Hands. And what he would do is he put his hands to catch the ball, but he couldn't absorb the ball; it just bounced off his hands, right? And so there's a lot of developmental skills we use to absorb forces. Catching is, the one that comes to my mind most clearly. Stability is the ability to resist movement, right? So when you're unstable, like if I put you guys on a balance board, you're kind of wobbling all over the place. If you're really stable, your body stays very still, right? So that's why when you're standing on the ground and you have a good solid stance, your body doesn't wobble. Right now, if I put you on a balance beam or anything else, there might be a little bit of wobble. Now, the more that you practice it, and again, getting into balance, your ability to maintain equilibrium, the more that you practice your balance, the more stable you become. Okay. And so again, there is a stability mobility trade-off, right? And again, can you increase stability in mobility? Yes, but will you ever be as stable in a mobile, or like in mobility, like you're moving in whatever um, fashion versus the stability? No. Okay. You'll always lose some stability as you're mobile, but you can always increase your stability and mobility through practice. Okay. So again, increase your base of support, lower the center of gravity. These are why, like when we talk about in sports, you have, like your coach will talk about defensive stance, and a defensive stance looks the same in many sports. So you think of like a volleyball player waiting to receive a serve, right? Looks very similar to a basketball player playing defense, which looks very similar to a shortstop waiting for a ball to be hit to them, so on and so forth. All those stances are similar, and the reason is because that lower center of gravity helps, with the slightly wider stance, helps to have good stability so that you can now move in multi directions and you're not off balance, right, to be more successful in your athletic endeavors. So again, how do we increase balance? Increase stability, improve strength, coordination, and proprioception are all things. Again, one of the things you can tell how much your proprioception plays into is stand on one leg. If you're good at it, close your eyes, right? All of a sudden your proprioception receptors that you use in your eyes now get somewhat fooled. And it's weird because, like, if you think about it, nothing else has changed. Your eyes are closed. But because you can't see your surroundings and you rely on that visual acuity to see what's going on, for some reason, just by closing your eyes, your balance now changes, right? It's, just one of those phenomenons. Now you can practice balancing with your eyes closed a lot, and it's going to increase it. Is it really going to increase much? Like, is it going to really help you in sports as much? Not unless you're playing in the dark, but it's not a bad thing just to increase your balance anyways. Um, but yeah, so you can increase your strength, right? When your muscles are weaker, you're less stable. Your coordination, how do you increase your coordination? Practice, 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 repetition. And again, perfect practice, so to speak, or good practice, so to speak, is what's going to help, right? Just if you're practicing something wrong, you're going to learn it wrong. All right. So new movers adopt stability strategies that maximize stability and balance, but hinder quick movements. Again, this is just, it is what it is, because sometimes when you try to do something quick and you don't have the coordination to do that movement, you'll be off balance, you fall, whatever it is. I'm trying to think of examples when you got somebody learning to do something new. Actually, you'll see it like if you're trying to teach somebody how to swing a baseball bat, and they've never swung a bat, and you throw the ball for them to swing, you'll see them do all kinds of goofy stuff and be off balance, right? Because they don't know what they're doing, right? But if you work on stability, so you're teaching them proper mechanics, while they're learning the proper mechanics, their swing's going to be much slower, right? This is always one of those things that it frustrates athletes when they have some bad habits, especially you'll see this again talking about swinging. You may see this with a baseball player or golfer. They try to fix some mechanic, and so their body is now adjusting to the new movement. Their brain and neuromuscular coordination is different, and then they're trying to memorize this new movement pattern. man, it slows down their swing, which means they're going to be, you know, like in a baseball, it usually means you're less successful at hitting the ball for a little while until you gain enough experience that that becomes second nature because you don't have to think about it. And with a golfer, they're going to, again, nice thing is the ball sitting still, but they may not have as much power in hitting the ball as far as they want, and so on and so forth, right? So with development, improvement, and ability to maintain upright posture during movements, movers shift to mobility strategies so they can then get quicker. Same thing, like that one brings to mind like running, right? So when I teach somebody proper running technique, again, yeah, it's going to slow them down for a little bit, but once their technique is on and they practice and practice and practice, they'll get faster than what they ever were before, and you'll continue to see them increase until they hit their maximum speed potential, right? So detecting and correcting errors. CAR has a 5-step process for observing, analyzing skill performance, developed in, or at least was published in '97. Observe the complex skill, analyze each phase and its key elements. So use your knowledge of mechanics in your analysis, select errors to be corrected, and decide on appropriate methods for correction of errors. Again, you can see that there's a lot of openness in that, and that's for your benefit. And I know a lot of people like to have, like step 1, do exactly this, step 2, do exactly this, step 3, do exactly this, step 4, do exactly this, and step 5, do exactly this. The problem in that is, like I told you before, I can take 5 athletes, all 5 of them could have a similar swing, like baseball swing. I could give them all 5 the exact same instructions in the exact same manner, and maybe 1, 2, maybe 3 all correct their swing to some extent. 2 of them might not, right? So I could either chalk it up to those 2 idiots aren't going to figure it out, or the reason this is open is because, like it says, you can, I could maybe show some kids, like just demonstrate a swing, and some kids are going to visually just pick up like what I'm doing, right? And it's going to take very minimal phasing. Other kids, I'm going to have to break down phase by phase, right? Like, here's what you're doing with your feet. Here's what you're doing with your, at the knee area. Here's what you're doing at the hip area. Here's what you're doing with your torso. Here's what I want to see you doing with your right arm, your left arm, so on and so forth, and and break it down into phases. So lower body phase, like when you're doing that, we'll step and that back leg turn. My coach always called it squashing the bug. You do this thing called back leg turn, squash the bug. Then you rotate the hips. It was like throwing the hips. As that happens, it twists your torso. So as your torso's twisting, he'd say, throw the hands forward, or throw the axe. I've heard that one before too. And then, for the follow through swing, they either say follow through, extend the arms, extend the hands, finish. Those are all different verbal cues that you can do while you give visual cues. And again, you can have them practice in sequence. Which sequence practice is best might depend on where they're having their biggest problems, right? So I typically start with the feet because the swing starts with the feet, but sometimes that doesn't work for some athletes. Sometimes I work backwards with them. We'll start with the arms, right? And we'll start with the upper body first, where they're swinging their hands and their hands go forward and back and forward and back and forward and back. Then we start doing that with the body twisting a little bit, and we work our way backwards, right? And I've done this with squats. I have to teach squat, top to bottom, bottom to top, forward, backward, backward, forward. I teach some folks from a standing position, some folks from a sitting position, because different cues are picked up differently, right? And again, then you got to select errors to be corrected, right? So you may have somebody that's got a lot of errors. So which ones do you start with? So we'll start with the major contributors to the things that are going to make them unsuccessful, right? Or the things that might injure them if they're attempting things at a max speed and stuff like that. Then work your way to some of the things that are, again, they're errors and they're not good form necessarily, but they're not hindering their abilities as much, or they're not causing them to be at a higher risk for injury and so on and so forth. Right. And again, how do you correct those things? And maybe like show them what they're doing, have them visually see you do it, have them try to mimic how to do it correctly. Some folks, you're going to have to take a more hands-on approach. Again, think about verbal cues that help them, like keeping their hands in, putting their hands out, staying low to the ground, whatever it is. So, summary: motion and stability are two principles of biomechanics that act as constraints, govern how an individual interacts with the environment when performing a task. Understanding a movement experience with motion and stability can lead to better control, performance, and motor skills. Stability and balance are two mechanical principles involved in efficient and skilled movements. That's it, guys. Chapter 3. If you have questions, please contact me and I'd be happy to help. And that's it. We'll do chapter 4 next.